This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. You know, the unmasking at the end of this pandemic is going to be so weird. Complete strangers who I've been talking to for months are going to drop their masks, and I'll finally know what they look like. Here's what we got for y'all. As vaccine eligibility expands, the return to the office is becoming a reality. But how safe is the air you're breathing at work? A Newsy investigation looks into employee concerns over air quality standards during a pandemic. Then, to kick off our Earth Week coverage, we'll tell you about a sustainable soccer team who went viral for going green. But first, here's what you need to know right now.
George Floyd's final words on May 25, 2020 were, "Please, I can't breathe." And he said those words to Mr. Officer. He said those words to the defendant. You have to take into account that officers are human beings, capable of making mistakes in highly stressful situations.
Today, the prosecution and defense presented closing arguments in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. In total, there were more than 45 witnesses and nearly 3 weeks of testimony, all focused on the moments in which George Floyd took his last breaths. The jury will be sequestered while they deliberate. Until today, they were allowed to return home at the end of every day. Chauvin is charged with second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. In the weekend ahead of the last day of trial, protesters took to the streets of Minneapolis demanding justice for Floyd and for 20-year-old Daunte Wright. Wright, a black man, was killed by police during a traffic stop in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota earlier this month. Kim Potter, a white woman and the former officer who shot him, faces second-degree manslaughter charges. Today is a pretty big day in the US vaccine rollout. All adults became eligible to get a COVID-19 vaccine. According to the latest data from the CDC, more than 50% of the adult population has already received at least one dose. This news comes as the FDA and CDC consider lifting the pause on the J&J vaccine, which could come as early as this week. It was paused after 6 cases of blood clots were reported among more than 7 million people who got the vaccine. The clots were found in women between the ages of 18 and 48, and one person died.
It may involve, for example, restrictions around age or gender, depending on what the data tells them. This is the safety system working. A signal was seen. It's being investigated.
Meanwhile, the CEO of Pfizer says a third vaccine dose between 6 and 12 months after the second is a, quote, likely scenario for those who got the Pfizer shot. He also noted the possibility of an annual coronavirus vaccine, which isn't a huge surprise. Researchers still don't know how long protection against the virus lasts, even for those who have been fully vaccinated. If you dipped into the news over the weekend, you would have seen that it was punctuated by gun violence. In just the last week, 3 separate mass casualty shootings in Austin, Texas, Indianapolis, Indiana, and Kenosha, Wisconsin made headlines across the country, and those are just the ones that actually got media coverage. As of Sunday, there were more than 5,500 victims of gun violence in 2021, according to the Gun Violence Archive. New details about the FedEx facility gunmen are coming out as the Indianapolis community continues to mourn 8 victims who were killed. Records show police seized a shotgun from the shooter in March of last year after his mother raised concerns about his mental state. Despite that, authorities did not subject him to Indiana's so-called red flag law. A few months after that, the shooter legally purchased 2 semi-automatic rifles, which he used in the deadly attack last week. Red flag laws currently exist in more than a dozen states, but how they are enacted varies from state to state. The White House is pushing for further congressional action like universal background checks and a ban on high-capacity magazines. After the recent mass shootings in Atlanta and Boulder, President Biden took a series of executive actions to fight the violence, including new rules on homemade ghost guns that don't have serial numbers and are difficult to trace. With more Americans returning to in-person jobs, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, is dealing with hundreds of reports of COVID-related concerns, including air quality standards. A Newsy investigation looked into workplace ventilation and the questions you should be asking your employer. Newsy's Patrick Terpstra has more.
Una infección muy grande.
Maritza Alarcón quickly wrote a will to leave her family last fall while battling COVID-19. She spoke to us with an interpreter.
She was really thinking that she was going to die.
Alarcón works as a hotel housekeeper in Boston. The hotel says it follows industry guidelines to filter the air. Masks are required for staff and guests in common areas. But because Alarcón rarely goes anywhere other than work, she thinks that's where she got sick.
Pienso que deberían ser un mejor trabajo, una mejor ventilación.
She's telling us about the ventilation, that it could be way better.
As states reopen and more of us return to our jobs in person, scientists say we should be paying more attention to the air we breathe at work. A year into an airborne pandemic, there are still no national mandatory COVID standards for ventilation and filtration that apply to all workplaces. OSHA hasn't even decided yet if new rules are necessary.
For people who work indoors for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, thinking about the air should be really near the top of your priority list, much higher than surface cleaning and temperature checks.
OSHA, the CDC, the EPA all have guidelines for how to improve air quality at work, but they're optional. Still, a lack of requirements for things like better air filters to trap COVID-19 droplets from a coughing coworker.
Workplaces are all over the place on paying attention to air quality.
We looked at recent complaints filed at OSHA from employees across the country at a variety of different workplaces. They show persistent concerns about COVID transmission at work. Hundreds of reports last month alone of no mask enforcement, lack of social distancing, adding to the risk of contagion in the air at restaurants, grocery stores, schools.
Aerosols build up in a room over an extended period of time. And so that's why you need ventilation so much.
OSHA is weeks behind schedule in deciding whether to issue emergency COVID standards that could include mandatory air quality rules. The agency tells us it's taking time to weigh pros and cons, hearing opposition from business interest groups. The CDC says even once employees are vaccinated, workplaces should still follow COVID recommendations for healthy air. Maritza Alarcón recovered from the virus.
No se preocupan por la salud de sus empleados.
She really wanted to share with you that they as well are putting their lives at risk every time they go to work.
Patrick Terpstra, Newsy, Washington.
Suddenly, I'm obsessing over the air I've been breathing in this empty office. Time is a flat circle would be a hell of a campaign slogan, and at least a few Texans wouldn't mind an administration of McConaughey-isms, according to a recent poll. Here's what's trending. The Dallas Morning News and the University of Texas at Tyler surveyed more than 1,100 registered voters and found that 45% wouldn't mind a Governor McConaughey. 33% of respondents said they'd vote for current Governor Greg Abbott, and 22% said they'd cast their ballot for somebody else.
Best I can tell is that the common denominator that is bipartisan, that can be scaled across humanity, is values.
McConaughey hasn't exactly been chill about his desire to govern his home state, with his musings on values and all, and, well, straight up saying that he's considering a run.
And I'm not asking a question. Don't comment, but should your next leadership role ever include you running for governor of this wonderful state, we'd be very happy for you. But don't answer that. I'm not asking that question.
I hear you.
I'm not asking.
It's a true consideration.
Of course, not everybody is all right with the idea of Governor McConaughey, with some accurately pointing out that he is just another celebrity with no political experience expressing interest in running for public office. The next Texas gubernatorial election is in 2022, which leaves plenty of time for folks to get their jokes off. Here's an early favorite. Football, like soccer football, is not my ministry. So when we noticed something was happening across the pond, we figured it'd be a good time to phone a friend of the show, Austin Kim, to explain what's going on here. Austin, what's the deal, man?
So Christian, basically this comes down to the big familiar football clubs or soccer clubs that everyone knows, Manchester United, Liverpool, Real Madrid, and they want to basically have a party, but only for the popular kids in the school, and no one else is invited. They still want to play their regular domestic league games on the weekends, all right? But during the school night, midweek, they want to play this exclusive competition, and it's invite only. That way they can make a lot more money and they can have more control over what they do. Well, that sounds all and well, but FIFA and Europe's top governing soccer body says, we don't like this. So they are issuing a couple threats, right? They say if they're going to go through this, these clubs want to go through this, they won't be allowed to play in their domestic league games on the weekends, and any player that plays in the Super League will not be allowed to represent their team on the national team in something like the World Cup. Like, could you imagine Cristiano Ronaldo or Leo Messi or one of my favorite players, Harry Kane, not playing for their team in the World Cup? So money is not only talking in this conversation, CB, it is driving this thing at 120 miles an hour to a really messy situation.
Who are you?
The excitement you feel after watching this is likely what Marvel wanted out of Iron Fist. No shade to Danny Rand. Marvel dropped the first teaser trailer for Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, giving us our first look at a jacked Simu Liu as the title character in the film. For the uninitiated, Shang-Chi is a martial arts master who will have to take on the Mandarin and the Ten Rings organization, the same crew that trained him up. Marvel has gone to lengths to make sure that this film is devoid of the Asian stereotypes found in the source material. According to Deadline, Marvel's goal here was to introduce a new hero who brings Asian and Asian American themes crafted by Asian and Asian American filmmakers. This film is written and directed by people of Asian descent, and Shang-Chi will be the MCU's first Asian protagonist. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings will hit theaters September 3rd. Let me get a nerd clap. The Ingenuity crew celebrated their Wright brothers moment after the solar-powered helicopter took flight above the Martian surface, which is a first. According to NASA, Ingenuity went airborne autonomously, ascended to about 10 feet, hovered for around 30 seconds, and then touched back down. And by the looks of it, the Perseverance rover, or as I call it, Percy, saw it all go down. I stand a wholesome robotic friendship. The operations head of the project said the main goal was to collect engineering data on the performance of the helicopter. This will help them make improvements on future vehicles. Ingenuity gets a rest day to charge up its solar panel and will take flight again on Thursday. The idea is to shorten the distance between flights and then get into some adventurous territory like this. This week is Earth Week, and on ITL, we're going to be reporting about our big, beautiful, blue spinning marble and efforts to make its environment a little better. In this next story, we're taking a look at how battery storage is becoming a more viable tool for meeting peaks in energy demand in an eco-friendly way.
Today, when demand for energy surges, many utilities will turn to so-called peaker plants powered by fossil fuels. But high-capacity batteries are starting to meet more of that demand, and that could help clean up some of the dirtiest parts of the US grid.
They charge overnight or in the late morning. They are fully charged by that 3-4 p.m. period, and then they can start to discharge to replace the energy that would have otherwise been generated from a peaking power plant.
Grid-scale batteries can now more often compete on cost with fossil power plants and pumped water storage. They're more often being installed with renewable power sources, which makes solar and wind energy more flexible. And renewable charged batteries are far cleaner than peaker plants, which can be heavy polluters even by fossil power standards.
One of the particular issues that we see with peaker power plants is a lot of them have higher emission rates for every megawatt hour of electricity generated than for some of your more baseload plants.
Research into peaker plants across the US has shown that a disproportionate number of these dirty plants are in disadvantaged communities. Large or even smaller distributed batteries could help meet community power needs in a much healthier, more environmentally just way.
If some of those batteries are also sited at, let's say, resilient community centers or at homes that can provide backup in the case of emergency or in blackouts, you're going to actually get multiple benefits from those same resources.
To realize these benefits, regulators will have to set policy to help the transition away from fossil plants. California recently met an aggressive mandate for grid storage, 1.3 gigawatts by 2020.
What the California storage target really did is that it opened up the market. It made California test those out and demonstrated to a bunch of other states that this can work.
Now, those states are setting their own targets. The Energy Department estimates that if current policy trajectories hold up, there could be 17 gigawatts of battery storage in the U.S. by 2050, much of it drawing charge from renewables to meet peak demand.
They really do work well together. Storage, solar meeting the first half, storage meeting the second half, and combined, they can really eliminate the need for those peaking generators to meet the peak demand on those hot summer days.
It's hard to gauge the bite that batteries could eventually take out of that demand across the U.S., but it stands to be a big one. Peak grid capacity is about 1,000 gigawatts, and about a quarter of that is peaker plants.
We're still talking about a very large number here. There are significant opportunities for batteries to replace a large fraction of the peaking capacity in the U.S.
If you're digging that, you'll like what we've got coming down the pike. Thursday is Earth Day, and we're putting together a special highlighting some of the best reporting about sustainability and making the world a better place in a non-corny Captain Planet sort of way. I'll see you back here after the break. Soccer clubs can do a lot for fans of the game, including triggering rage or drunken elation. But one team out of the UK is becoming a model for sustainability. Our resident football expert, Austin Kim, is back to explain more.
Forest Green Rovers looks like any other soccer club. Packed stands, pre-COVID obviously, and plenty of tradition. But upon closer look, the club truly lives up to the color in its name.
We're more about the doing than the talking or the pledging.
That's Dale Vince. He bought the club more than a decade ago, and he initially didn't have sustainability in mind, but...
And then I just quickly bumped into the fact that the club and the sport more generally was doing a lot of things that I just didn't agree with and didn't sit with me. So we started making changes at the club.
That meant installing charging stations for electric vehicles around the club and literally having sustainability in the team's fabric.
This year we're launching a shirt made out of coffee grounds and recycled plastic, so 50-50 mix again.
There are solar panels on the roof of the stadium and the field itself.
Capture the water from underneath the pitch and use it again. That's a big sustainability issue.
And grass maintained thanks to Mobot, a solar-powered robotic mower that cuts the entire pitch on its own without human intervention. And then, of course, is the food.
The menu is completely plant-based, so we won't use any animal products.
That's the team's head chef, Jade Crawford. Players, staff, and even fans can still eat burgers and pies, except it's all veggie-based. And, yes, it wouldn't be a proper match day without a pint. Vegan, of course.
If they come to the ground and they try, a veggie burger or a sausage roll or, like a fajita or something, then they might go home like, that was really good. I'm going to go to a supermarket and buy some vegan food. So it kind of just opens people's minds as well.
FIFA named it the greenest soccer club in the world, and the UN says it's the first carbon neutral team. Off-field titles are nice, but Forest Green is in the thick of it in League Two, one of England's professional leagues.
When it comes to football, we have to be a great football club to carry the credibility of the environment message.
So why go through all the trouble? Climate change is affecting sports, from playing baseball games during wildfires to flooding at stadiums. And yet most sports leagues worldwide contribute to the problem. For instance, U.S. sporting events generated 39 million pounds of trash in 2018.
What we're trying to do is to show people that there's another way to live, and we don't preach or dictate or anything like that. We just do it ourselves. We put it out there. We hope that people see that and think about that maybe in the backs of their minds.
Green initiatives planted in their heads, keeping the club at the forefront of sustainability. For Newsy, I'm Austin Kim.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to holler at us on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. Compliments on the show are great, but you can also use the hashtag to complain about your least favorite soccer clubs. I won't mind, and I also won't participate. A personal anecdote here. I took a train over the weekend and I forgot how soothing they can be. When I wasn't asleep, I had a fine time watching the world zip by me out of the window. And I know I'm not the only one with a soft spot for this way of travel. President Biden has also had a love for trains, specifically Amtrak. and his infrastructure plan would invest a good bit in the future of railways. Newsy's Shira Tarlow shows us what a rail revolution could look like.
It's a once-in-a-generation investment in America.
As President Biden pushes his $2 trillion infrastructure plan,
It's the single largest investment in American jobs since World War II.
transportation advocates are hopeful the nation's rail system could finally get its long-awaited moment in the sun.
We've got a president who loves trains, a Secretary of Transportation who's talking about the need to become the world leader.
President Biden, nicknamed Amtrak Joe, took the train daily from his home in Delaware to D.C. during his 36 years in the Senate. He even launched his first presidential campaign in 1987 at his hometown train station.
Ahoy, everybody!
And rode the rails hours after announcing his White House bid in 2019. The Amtrak evangelist now sits in the Oval Office, and his infrastructure plan sets aside $80 billion for modernizing and expanding the nation's rail network over 8 years.
You and your family could travel coast to coast without a single tank of gas.
The idea is actually about more than family trips. It's to scale up Amtrak service to reduce traffic and air pollution and expand access to jobs while creating thousands of new ones. Transportation is the largest source of the country's greenhouse gas emissions. Amtrak responded to the president's proposal by unveiling its dream map for what an expanded U.S. rail network would look like by 2035. The project would provide service to up to 160 communities with 30 possible new routes. It includes new lines in major cities like Las Vegas, Phoenix, Nashville, and Columbus, a revamped Texas network, and expanded service across the Midwest and Southeast.
Transportation is sort of the great social equalizer. If you can provide access, you can provide that access can be access to jobs, access to health, access to economic opportunity.
Advocates and experts believe the nation's rail network has been underfunded, underinvested, and ignored for too long, even though Americans largely embrace train travel when it's viable.
The Northeast Corridor, for example, those trains are packed every day. And it's not that great of a service, and it's not that frequent, and yet they're still packed because it's still better than everything else.
Amtrak set records for ridership and revenue in 2019 and was on track to turn a profit in 2020 for the first time ever, but it took a massive hit amid the pandemic. The nation's rail network has historically received limited funding, and advocates say building a high-speed rail system would require far more than $80 billion, particularly because the U.S. has a lot of catching up to do.
$80 billion, it's not even close if we're going to meet Secretary Buttigieg's goal of becoming the world leader in high-speed rail. Just to catch up to where China is now, we're going to need to invest $1 trillion over the next 10 years.
To keep up, an infrastructure package will need to advance through Congress. Many Republicans have already united in opposition against it, taking issue with its price tag and scope, as well as calls to fund it by raising the corporate tax rate. In the past decade, Republicans have been reluctant to spend on rail projects. They've slashed Amtrak's funding, redirected cash, and even suggested privatizing the rail system altogether. Many Republicans have argued trains are an outdated mode of transportation that's slow, expensive, requires constant maintenance, and threatens American individualism. The GOP's broader opposition toward rail has even been described as a war. Rail advocates, meanwhile, believe a high-speed network will pay for itself because it'll create thousands of jobs, fight climate change, and bridge the gap between rural populations and urban hubs.
The time has come for a rail revolution.
Shira Tarlow, Newsy, Washington.
That's it for us, gang. Be sure to check out our eco-friendly content all week long. And if you really care about the climate, tune in Thursday for our Earth Day special. We'll be back for more In the Loop tomorrow, same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.